So thanks everyone for joining us today to talk about sociopolitical stress management. This webinar is going to be recorded and available for future reference. We do ask that everybody doesn't use the chat feature for the program, instead trying to use the Q&A function for any questions, and then we'll do our best to respond to those questions throughout the program. We do have a very lovely and large panel with us today, so each panelist is just going to introduce themselves at the start of their respective section. And since we have a short time ahead of us and we have a lot of information to get ahead, let's get started. So we have a few objectives that we want to make sure everyone has as takeaways today. We can go to the next slide. And for anyone reviewing this in the future, we just wanted to give you a little table of contents so that you can stream to the section that you're looking for in the future. And that said, we can get started.
All right, so thank you for passing it off to me, Steph. Hello, everyone. My name is Sutan Magruder. I am the Assistant Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as well as a licensed psychologist here at Penn State Counseling and Psychological Services. So today I have a lot of information and I'm going to try to condense within about 10 minutes or so, so bear with me. But really my hope is to try to set the frame for this presentation webinar by first I'm wanting to try to define and shed some light on sociopolitical stress. I want to highlight the ways in which college-age students are politically engaged, and then I want to try to end with making a connection between sociopolitical stress and college student mental health. Now, I think it's important to recognize that politics has, not always been at the forefront of the sort of discussion within the United States in particular. However, we've seen over the past decade and a half or so that it has sort of taken center stage in a sort of like collective societal conscious. And we know within some studies listing in the past decade and a half or so that politics has now become more of an ongoing source of concern and stress, particularly within households, residents within the United States. And that sort of also coincided with an increase in discrimination that I'll talk about a little later. Now, just to operationalize and define sociopolitical stress, I like this definition from Ballard, who talks about sociopolitical stress as intense feelings and experiences people have that stem from the awareness of, exposure to, and or involvement in political events and phenomena. Now, I really like this definition because it speaks to the different ways in which people can be positioned with respect to social issues and politics, such that an individual can be at the forefront of protesting, or they can, on the periphery, sort of like hear discussion from peers or family members about politics. And so no matter where you're at on that spectrum, you can be impacted. Now, I think there's a need to understand changes in human engagement to help understand some of the challenges within our current social political environment. And I first want to take us back to 2023, where the U.S. Surgeon General identified loneliness and isolation as a public health emergency, particularly amongst our adolescents and college-age students. And we know that the implications of that has been a significant impact on the health and mental health of these particularly vulnerable populations. And I think with that and the need to find connection, individuals have really leaned into political identities, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, a conservative. Individuals have found their sort of a mark in place within these particular groups, which has influenced the ways some cross-group interactions, right? And so this in-group, out-group mentality that we've come to, we've seen that there's been a shift in this unity against the other, such that individuals are, wanting to defeat or eliminate, in some cases, the out group, even if it comes at the own expense of their individual connected needs and well-being. And so I think the way that individuals are relating socially has definitely informed and contributed to the social political environment that we're seeing now. Now, to pivot into talking about some college-age political activity, the data from the Pew Research Center shows that while historically younger adults were less engaged than their older adult counterparts, we actually see that this trend has shifted in a sense, and we now know that younger adults are just as active, politically active, as their older adult counterparts. And we see this in their direct involvement in civic engagement and activities, as well as their offline civic communications. And here I have a graph showing just the engagement, the turnout amongst different population cohorts for the US presidential elections. And we can see the significant spike from 2016 to 2020 amongst our younger populations. Now, while there's similarities in the way that individuals are engaging, there's differences in how people are engaging. And so we see that younger adults are more apt to be engaged on social media, social networking sites. And while this is a helpful thing because of more access to information, greater connectivity to just different diverse communities, we know that it's also problematic. Studies have pointed to the unhelpful impacts that social media has on the health and well-being, particularly of adolescents. And so you're pairing this sort of like toxic environment with the sort of toxicity that we're seeing within our socio-political sphere. And I think that creates a recipe for an unhelpful sort of environment that is definitely detrimental to the health and well-being of our college-age populations. Now, to sort of wrap all of kind of what I've been sharing up into a particular case study, we can see within the 2016 election, we know that when elections come up, there's a lot of negative rhetoric that comes about, particularly from our politicians, and it's centralized a lot of the times toward our marginalized communities. And we know data from the Southern Poverty Law Center actually points to an increase in identity-based discrimination, harassment, and hate crimes that are targeting many of these communities. And the data from the FBI also shows an increase in hate crimes, for example, around election cycles. And now the study from Albright and Hurd actually pinpointed and saw that the effects on individuals aren't necessarily equal. And we know that oftentimes our marginalized communities are often showing poorer health outcomes and mental health outcomes with respect to different presidencies, particularly our multiply marginalized students. Now, this last part of my section is dealing with socio-political stress and mental health amongst college students. And so the data for these next few slides is actually taken from the Center for Collegiate Mental Health, which is the largest practice research network in the world that is focused and studies college student mental health. Now, we have some fresh new data here. Within this year, CCMH has tried to understand the prevalence of socio-political stress amongst college students seeking mental health services here at Penn State. And so this data is from the past few weeks, looking at the prevalence. And what we found is that approximately 64% or so of students have at least some nervousness and stress about socio-political issues. And of that, approximately 19% of students have regular or frequent nervousness and stress about socio-political issues. And so we can see even from this data that it's, what's happening here at Penn State for our students who are seeking mental health services serves as sort of a microcosm of what we're seeing in the larger society. Now, as I talked about discrimination, and I'll try to end with this type of data, we have data collected from approximately 78,000 students treating at 85 different college counseling centers nationally from 2021 to 2023. Now, students are asked within the past 6 months, have you experienced discrimination or unfair treatment due to any of the following parts of their identities? And they're asked to answer yes or no to one or more of these different types of identities. And so as the rates of discrimination in marginalized versus marginalized groups, we can see at baseline, on average, individuals are reporting approximately 20% or so of those individuals are reporting some type of discrimination. And obviously, we can see here that there's a significant disparity amongst individuals from marginalized identities reporting significantly more higher rates of perceived discrimination than their other counterparts. Breaking it down even further by groups, we find that racial discrimination by racial ethnic groups. We see that our Black African-American students are reporting significantly higher rates of racial ethnic discrimination than their counterparts. Similarly, rates of gender discrimination by specific gender identity groups. Here, we see that trans men, non-binary, and trans women are unfortunately reporting significantly higher rates of gender-based discrimination. Now, we know that discrimination is associated with poor mental health concerns, and so this graph here shows that, and that those who report some type of discrimination are endorsing significantly higher rates of mental health symptoms amongst these indices, and that being social isolation, distress, and suicidal ideation. And so what this tells us too is that there's a compounding effect of experiencing discriminatory experiences, such that the more discrimination along these different areas of one's identity that an individual encounters and endorses, we know that's related to higher reports of different types of symptomology in the mental health domain. And so just to wrap up, sociopolitical stress has been increasing amongst college-age individuals, which coincides with their increased participation in politics. Two, sociopolitical environments can cause harm to everyone, particularly individuals from historically marginalized groups. And last but not least, college students who seek mental health services at college counseling centers report experiencing sociopolitical stress and discrimination, the latter of which is associated with poor mental health outcomes. And so I will pass this on to Steph.
Thank you, Sutan. My name is Stephanie Stama. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Assistant Director for Community Education and Outreach at Counseling and Psychological Services at University Park. Today, I'm going to be talking with you about coping strategies. Coping strategies are something you can do preventatively and something you can do in a given moment. So everything that we're going to talk about today, I want you to keep that in mind as far as how you implement it for yourself. But before we really get into the coping strategies themselves, we're just going to talk a little bit about stress. When we're talking about stress in general, stress is actually a useful thing for humans. It's something that motivates us to do our daily activities, engage in our daily roles. And stress can also be unhelpful though, right? It can be underwhelming and it can be overwhelming. Stress about sociopolitical matters is absolutely a common experience. It's something pretty typical because sociopolitical matters are really complex and they can hit home for people in really different ways. So that's not necessarily pathological. And what we're talking about today isn't necessarily something pathological either. And it is time to reach out and get help, or reach out to somebody else and support them with some more specific maybe treatment intervention when there are greater concerns here, like when daily routines and activities are not taking place, somebody's not getting out of bed in the morning, engaging in their daily hygiene, when there's safety risk, harm concerns for oneself or for other people. And when just go-to coping isn't effective anymore. When coping becomes really unhealthy, those are the times that people really are going to want to reach out. So we're going to start with the most basic needs. These are the things that you actually have the most control over. And we're going to start with this acronym HALT: hungry and hydrated, angry and anxious, lonely and tired. These are things that we need when we are tiny little newborn babies, and that doesn't actually change when we're adults. It's just something that we take more control over when we're adults. You might pull an all-nighter to study for an exam, or drink a lot of caffeine as you're pulling that all-nighter to study for an exam. And just because you can do that doesn't mean it's actually helpful or healthy for you. So these are the things that we need to keep an eye on. And when something in this acronym isn't tended to, that's the time to halt, to stop, and take care of and tend to that thing. So for example, if you notice around 3 o'clock every day, you start to get low blood sugar, you're feeling really tired, you get a little irritable and hangry, as we know the term, that preventatively is maybe something you can do by bringing a glass of water around with you, or a bottle of water that you can refill during the day to keep yourself hydrated. Bring a snack to keep yourself, keep your blood sugar going and keep yourself really nourished during the day. These things can act as a domino effect. So being able to tend to these few items that are just about your basic body functions are actually really critical. Angry and oops, sorry. Angry and anxious, you can take care of by doing a deep breath, splashing cold water on your face, taking a cold sip of water. That actually resets your nervous system. Loneliness, you don't have to go and like have a great time and a great influential conversation with somebody to feel less lonely. You can feel connected to people in other ways, like maybe just hanging out at a cafe near other people, maybe connecting even just with characters in a book or in a movie, and that's okay too. Tired, though, is a great segue also to our next slide. Um, the first thing that you're really going to want to tend to when you're thinking about a routine for tending to all of these areas is a sleep schedule and sleep hygiene. Sleep is one of our most basic human needs. It's something all animals need, all living things, all mammals really need sleep. So keeping a basic sleep routine, like trying to fall asleep and wake up at this about the same time every day, which I know doesn't sound super appealing, but it's pretty critical to your daily functioning. Also making sure that you have well-rounded meals. And that doesn't mean some kind of like perfect health plan by any means. It's just having a variety of nutrients that you're getting into your body instead of maybe eating like that delicious grilled cheese every single day. Try to just mix it up a little bit. And then your body's going to have the vitamins and the nourishment it needs to function. Move your body. And this doesn't mean like formal exercise or anything. You don't have to get a gym membership. For those of you watching, we can just even do a simple exercise together. If you're able, maybe just moving your arms out to the side. It's okay. You can do it where you are. No one's watching you. You're only watching me. And if you're able, maybe stretch your arms as far as you can to the walls and turn your head slowly, just looking to the other end of your fingertips. Maybe taking a deep breath into your belly and noticing your belly move and stretching if you're able up to the ceiling or to the sky. And one more deep breath and just notice how your belly moves again. And that's just a really simple body movement that can just replenish your body and your energy just a little bit from being a little more stagnated. Another thing I think we tend to overlook is just having fun. It doesn't mean you have to join a formal club. You can, certainly, if you want to, but you can also just have fun in really informal ways. So sure, you can join the knitting and crocheting club, or you can just kind of knit and crochet on your own for maybe, 20 minutes every day and protect that time. For all of these things, protect your time to have a snack or eat lunch. Protect your time to have fun throughout the week or a little bit of time every day. If you want to solidify 5 minutes to watch some TikTok videos every day, because that's what your self-care is, absolutely go for it. But do these things and take care of keeping them in your schedule and protecting them like you would work or a class. And finally, as we're talking about routine, yeah, having a basic consistent schedule is important, but so is injecting some novelty. So it doesn't have to be anything major. I'm not expecting you to go hike up a mountain sporadically throughout, on a random day in the week, but maybe you can just take a different route to class instead of your typical route that you take. And just notice how it feels a little bit different and a little bit more refreshing. We would not be doing our job here if we weren't talking about limiting and managing news and social media. So news right now, right, technology that brings us the news, it's bigger, faster, stronger than ever. So there are a lot of great techniques that you can use to engage your, thank you, to engage your media literacy and to help manage some of the input of information that even if you don't notice it, kind of subconsciously is probably stressing you out. We don't need every single little detail of every little element of the news. So sometimes it helps to get yesterday's news, grab a physical newspaper and see the big zoom out picture of some of the big stories you just need to know. And as technology and media are getting faster, better, stronger than ever on a really regular basis, media literacy needs change too. So this is a great example of an upcoming webinar for those watching this live, or an upcoming program for those who are watching this live that's going to be happening on October 11th. And for those of you watching this in the future, know that these kind of media literacy programs are happening actually pretty regularly. You have wonderful access to the internet, and so just keep yourself informed as best as possible so that you can also be most informed about what you need for your own self-care too. We also wouldn't be here as mental health practitioners talking about feelings if we didn't talk about feelings. This really is about what we usually people have heard this term sweeping it under the rug, right? You can hold in all of your feelings all you want and sweep it under the rug, but eventually the rug's going to get really big and you're going to trip over it. So it can actually be pretty helpful to unpack the rug every now and then and maybe clean it out. So trying to acknowledge your feelings doesn't mean you're actually trying to do anything about controlling them or changing how you're feeling. That's not it at all. We're just saying identify the sensations related to your feelings, like, oh, I'm feeling this in my chest and maybe in my belly a little bit, and naming it if you can. Like, oh, is that like frustration maybe or anxiety? And it's okay if you can't name it too. Human emotions are really complex. So no shame and no judgment if you can't name it. Just maybe notice you can't name it. And then acknowledge this feeling's here with me. And that's it. Done. No need to do anything. Not resisting it. That's tiring. Just maybe metaphorically having it sit next to you and notice it's there. But again, you don't have to do anything with it. And it might continue you might continue having that feeling. The feeling might go away in return. And again, non-judgmentally, just kind of recognizing that that's the cycle of being human. Seeking social support and community is really critical when we are talking about stress in general, and especially sociopolitical stress. Um, I do want to highlight that typically when people think seeking support and community and belonging, they think human connection. That is not necessarily what all people need when they want to seek belonging and a sense of connection. That could be a sense of connection through art, through cinema, through spirituality and faith and religion, through nature. There are a ton of ways that people can feel connected to something larger than themselves, and that's absolutely okay too. And some people do connect with other humans, and that's the way that they find they best have a sense of support, balance, and community. And so just think now to yourself, maybe do a little mental exercise of listing like who are your top 2 or 3 people who are your trusted people in your life who you would go to if you had maybe a difficult situation or circumstance you wanted to get some support with, or who you could go to when something really complex was happening in the world and you just wanted to de-stress. But then also think about what do you want to do to connect with people when you don't want to just talk about the stuff? Sometimes we don't want to talk about, like we talked about on the last slide, like we don't want to always talk about our feelings, and that's okay. You can express them in other ways. So you can connect over more than just your stressors. Like go out and have fun, go watch a movie with some friends, or go just have lunch and talk about, a really bad Netflix show that you've been watching, and that's fine. You can be with other people in ways that are more than just your stressors. Activism as coping is going to be really important here, and I'm aware that another speaker is going to talk a little bit about this as well. So I'm just going to give you a quick oversimplification of activism as coping. First and foremost, activism is different for everybody. It's not always marching and going out and protesting, but people can often feel that something like that is considered their activism. And it doesn't need to be that way. There are other activism engagements on the spectrum. For example, maybe it's a little more passive, like shifting up the Netflix algorithm by watching a documentary that's really important to you regarding, civic and political engagement, and you want to really like watch it over and over and get that Netflix algorithm adapted. Maybe it's writing a letter or an email to your local representatives. It doesn't always have to be something super physical or active in the way that we might typically think of activism, since active is a critical element of that word. Civic engagement and activism certainly has benefits. You gain a lot of resilience. You feel less sense of connection and belonging with others who are also being active and engaged with you. And you can feel a sense of relief, and it builds a lot of resiliency and empowerment. So all these wonderful things, though, also can come with potential risks. A lot of things Sutan already mentioned. For example, you're putting yourself at a greater risk potentially for racism, discrimination experiences. Keeping, if you don't feel like your body is safe by being active in, for example, going out and protesting or being at speaker engagement events, then that's a con, certainly. And that's when I want to just remind everybody that it's absolutely okay to tap out. Taking care of yourself, pulling down your oxygen mask for yourself before you help others is absolutely a critical element of it. So it's okay to say not right now and do a different type of activism or civic engagement than maybe you're used to, and then go back to that at another time when it feels right. Last piece here is mindfulness, and just a very oversimplified view of mindfulness is what I'm going to give you today, because mindfulness is a little more complex in a way. As you practice it, though, a lot of these pieces come to you. A lot of the time people have a misunderstanding of mindfulness being like blank mind, and that is not it at all. Mindfulness is actually quite an active presence of being in the moment. People sometimes will practice a mindfulness exercise with maybe their physical senses, a sense of touch or smell, for example, a sight, noticing things that they can see, feel, hear. People might also use mindfulness as a visualization exercise and a way to kind of give themselves a little mini mental break, a little mini mental vacation. We talk about it as kind of, maybe you're in the river rapids and you just need to get off on the side of the river for a little bit, take a breather, and then you have a little bit of a better idea of how you want to go and approach going back in. But it's not making the river rapids necessarily go away. It's not this cure-all. It does certainly restructure your brain neurons to more paced and adaptive ways of coping, certainly. So mindfulness can be helpful, in a little bit of a moment, but with routine practice can have actually exponential benefits too. If you notice in a mindfulness exercise that your mind is wandering a lot, that is nothing to be judgmental with yourself about. In fact, your mind has to wander in order to be mindful. If your mind was still all the time, that's actually not necessarily being mindful. Just like lifting weights, mindfulness is the practice of moving the thought that's escaped you and bringing it back with a mental pull. I'm trying to show everybody in my tiny Zoom window and it's not working out so well. So just imagine that you're building a mental muscle in the same way that you'd be lifting weights to build physical muscle. You're grabbing that thought that's trickled away from you and bringing it back, and non-judgmentally noticing it'll probably wander away again. And that's okay. That's the human brain. So with this, I am very pleased to shift this to our next speaker, who's going to share with us a little bit more about mindfulness through a mindful invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephanie. Hello, everyone. My name is Blake Kalani. I'm a faculty member in the College of Health and Human Development, and I study the use of mindfulness and compassion-based practices, particularly for young people, to support their social and emotional well-being. I am very appreciative of the framing, the way that Stephanie teed up this mindful invitation. As she said, it is very true that there are a lot of myths around mindfulness and meditation, and those myths end up meaning that a lot of people don't even approach it. It feels like I can't sit, I can't meditate, I can't clear my mind. And so I'm so glad that we can use this opportunity to challenge those myths and to hopefully provide you with a new understanding and an invitation into what mindfulness can be. As we've been saying throughout this webinar, much of the political tension and stress that we are seeing outward, while we see it happening around us, what we often don't realize is that that tension then starts to come inward. In mindfulness, we often say tension out often leads to tension in. So many times we are very quick to be aware of the stress that is around us, but it can be a little bit trickier to come inward and notice it within as well. One of the things that a lot of tension around sociopolitical issues cause is they lead to a lot of tension. And in mindfulness language, we talk about space. And when stress is really high, space is often really limited. In fact, this is often why whenever something around us feels really stressful, our bodies get really tense. Yeah, you might even notice, like right now in my window, I'm like lifting my shoulders up, right? Like we see this on campus, even as we're walking around, where stress causes a lot of tension, a lot of tightness in the body. A sense of loneliness, isolation can lead to high levels of tension, tightness. In other words, no space. Yeah. And this is particularly tricky in a culture that often sends messages of scarcity and, that there's not enough and that there's no space. And so the invitation here today is to create space. In the coming weeks, in the coming months, as the political stress and tension increases, you may notice that suddenly space feels like it becomes less and less, not just around you, but also within you. And so we can take these moments to notice that tension and tightness, and we can invite some space. So I'm now going to just lead us through a brief mindfulness practice to help you create space in the mind and body. This is going to be a way to just give you a small practice here that you can take with you then into all the places that Stephanie listed that you can connect. You could do this by yourself. You could do this in nature, in our new museum, wherever it might be. So however you're sitting, wherever you're sitting, the way that we can create space is to first ground ourselves. Yeah. And so this can sometimes look like if you're sitting in a place where it feels comfortable right now to close your eyes, you can do so. But if that doesn't feel safe to do, you could just lower your gaze. And so especially if you're out in nature or in a museum, looking at art or listening to music, you might just lower your gaze and just find a spot around you or in front of you to just gently rest your gaze on. And if you're doing this right now, again, the first thing that you might do is sense into this moment. Now, that can feel like sort of an abstract invitation. But what I mean by that is wherever you're sitting right now, what does the chair feel like? What does the space feel like that is created where you are sitting? Noticing the contact that the back makes with the chair. If the feet are on the ground right now, you might notice, sometimes I even push into the ground a little bit with my feet just to notice my surroundings, what's here, what's happening right now. So again, just coming into that sense of touch with our surroundings, taking a moment to notice what it feels like to tap into that sense. And then once we ground, what can next be really helpful is that we come into the breath. We're always breathing, but we often don't notice, don't pay attention to our breathing. And so this can be a moment where we come inward, and even right now, you might just notice, what does it even feel like to breathe? Noticing how the air enters through the mouth, through the nose, and no need to hold the breath or try to control it. Instead, just noticing the space that is created when we breathe. When we breathe in, there is space created as the lungs fill up with fresh air. We may even notice the body rise a bit. And then as we exhale, more space is being created. And so then once we ground, and then once we tap into our breath, you then may begin to open up your eyes, bring your gaze back up to the front, and then seeing what it's like to do a little bit more sensing. What's incredible about our senses is that they are always happening right now. So when we tap into whatever senses are available to us, We are allowing ourselves to experience the moment. We often eat too quickly without tasting it. We shower without feeling the water. There's all sorts of things that we do throughout our day where we could tap into our senses a little more. So once we ground, once we breathe, you then may take a moment to just pause, stop, rest, and notice what is around you. So if you are near a window right now, maybe look out the window, see if you notice something. For me, there's some leaves changing outside. There might be a photo on your desk. Sometimes we put these photos or these pictures around our spaces, but then we forget that they're there. And so you might look at them, take a moment to just slow down time a bit to notice what is around you. And then from that space, we might notice that with that more space created, we can begin to respond to life rather than react where there is such little space. So I encourage all of you to keep practicing grounding, breathing, sensing. And again, as Stephanie said, it is incredible to do this in the name of connection. So I really encourage you to find some form of connection, whether it's with a human or maybe with the nature, that you practice this grounding, breathing, and sensing as many times throughout your day as you can. So as we approach the next few weeks, again, and as you notice this sense of tension, this less space that is created, again, the mindful reminder to all of you is to find where can space be made and what might be possible within that space. Thank you. We're now going to head into the freedom of expression.
Great. Thank you so much, Blake. I feel somewhat badly for now entering into the freedom of expression space and what we're talking about after that really terrific mindfulness session. So thank you, Blake. Danny Sheehy, Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs. And I'm sharing with you some information today just about freedom of expression and the First Amendment on campus and how we navigate these issues, just because we know that many of these issues, as the previous speakers have addressed, they impact how students are experiencing their time at Penn State and universities generally. So I just want to share with you a little bit about how we navigate these things and how we're mindful of that and how we try to both navigate what is the First Amendment and free speech and how we support students. So just important to know, the First Amendment is just one long sentence, really. So the First Amendment talks about all of these things. The topic we're focusing on today is freedom of speech, a little bit of the freedom to peacefully protest, but really we're talking about freedom of speech. So next slide. So what is freedom of speech? You know, there are things that are unprotected speech. So freedom of speech covers all modalities of speech. So it could be written, expressive speech, spoken, bulletin boards, social media, that sort of thing. So freedom of speech does cover that, but not all speech is protected. So if speech rises to the level of these things, then it is not protected. So fighting words, true threats, speech that incites or produces imminent lawless action, and of course, obscenity and child pornography, defamation, commercial speech, which has some diminished protection. But really, we spend most of our time in the areas that I work with, which is like behavioral threat, First Amendment expressive speech, student accountability, with fighting words, true threats, speech that incites or produces lawless action. We're trying to discern if speech that comes onto campus meets these thresholds, then it is not allowed. However, if it falls short of those, then we do allow the speech to occur and allow and then navigate how to allow that speech to happen while creating a safe environment and supporting those who may be impacted by speech, because we do recognize that speech has impact. So true threats, just so folks know, if we determine that the speech communicated by someone has an intent to commit, or they express that they have an intent to commit an act of unlawful violence, then we can take action. That is not protected speech, or it intends to incite an immediate breach of the peace. And importantly, the speaker does not have to intend to carry out the violence, but if they engage in the behavior where they intend to commit an act of unlawful violence, or they tend to incite an immediate breach of the peace, then we can take action. Okay, next slide. Some folks talk about hate speech. hate speech is actually, just importantly, it's not an actually legal term, and there's no hate speech exception to free speech rights. Again, that doesn't mean that we don't understand that speech that is considered hateful doesn't have impact, because we know that it does, but we are limited legally from what we're able to do to address that speech. So speech that may be considered racist, vulgar, we again recognize that that has impact, but is often protected speech unless it rises to the level of harassment, true threats, or fighting words. So those things, that's important to know. However, we as a university are committed to not just saying, sorry, it's not a violation. If it's not a violation, we are exploring what else can we do. So we work often with our spaces that support marginalized, minoritized students to engage in conversations about some of what was mentioned earlier. What makes sense for you? If there is a speaker who's coming onto campus who espouses hateful rhetoric, or they engage in hateful rhetoric, they espouse views that are antithetical, what makes sense for you to respond to that? And I think next slide here. Yeah, next slide. And we're talking about, where is the speech occurring? So if it's in a public forum, which I often equate a public forum here at Penn State to, let's say, the Hub lawn. So big open space, really any outdoor space is likely a public forum here at Penn State. So where is the speech occurring? Then a limited public forum would be inside maybe the Hub. So for example, like, one of the auditoriums in the Hub, and non-public would be like an office in the Hub, right? So think about that. Penn State does have the ability to engage in reasonable time, place, and manner decisions that may restrict speech based on where it's at. Now, know with that, our goal is not to restrict free speech. Our goal is to allow free speech to occur as long as it does not violate policy or the law. But we also want the speech, we also want the speech to occur safely. So we're often engaged in conversations with student organizations who may be bringing folks on campus, or even spontaneous speakers about, where is this happening? Is it disruptive? Is it, disrupting current university activities? What are reasonable restrictions or decisions we can make that enable the speech to occur, again, if it doesn't violate the law or policy, and we want to do it safely. So next slide. We are often engaging with students, depending on where that's occurring and how that's occurring. What does make sense? We do support peaceful assembly among our student population. We want, I get enthused when students actually, when they are passionate about a cause, they want to support something that's important to them. But we're engaging in conversations with students about, what does that look like? A little bit of what Stephanie mentioned before. What does that look like for you? We don't want to dictate how you respond to someone that you believe is offensive, or is espousing rhetoric or values that are antithetical to who you are or who you believe Penn State to be. But what does that look like for your community? We encourage folks to talk with their friends, talk with their community, talk with their student organizations, to have some internal reflection about, what's healthiest for me to respond, what feels best for me to respond, what allows me to use my voice if I'd like to use my voice. So might that be protesting, right? Protesting the event, then we want to help support your ability to do so. Might that be avoiding the event altogether and not giving it any error space, or any more error space than it deserves? Might that be creating an alternative event, doing something, writing, a congressman, whatever that looks like, a congressperson, whatever that looks like for you, we want to help support you, and we want to partner with you in that. We don't, as a university, know what's best for you, what helps create the resilience skills that we hope that you're gaining while you're at Penn State, and what helps you, heal and grow and respond in ways that are healthy for you. But we want to help support you in creating those and identifying what those are. So we do support peaceful assembly, but we also support what's most helpful and healthy for you. Next slide. Great. So overall, that's kind of free speech in a nutshell, but we really want to engage with the community to help navigate, especially in an election year, what this looks like. We know it's going to be an active year. So however we can partner with the community to respond in the healthiest ways possible, then we want to be able to do so. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Deanna Locke, in Student Accountability for Conflict Response.
Thanks, Danny. I'm Deanna Locke. I'm an Educational Interventions Coordinator in the Office of Student Accountability and Conflict Response, also known as OSCAR, because it's a bit of a mouthful. OSCAR is the Student Affairs Office that works to uphold the community and university standards. We oversee the Student Code of Conduct, which ensures that student rights are protected and outlines the university's expectations for the behavior of Penn State students. We work to provide compassionate interventions where students are heard, respected, and treated with dignity. One of the services we offer is conflict response. So that's what I wanted to really share information about today. We have several different options to help students when they are experiencing a conflict. Our services are flexible and voluntary and intended to develop outcomes that benefit those involved. Conflict response is most often used in situations where there hasn't been a violation of the Student Code of Conduct. At times, participation in these services may involve taking responsibility for harm caused. Perfect, that's the slide I'm looking for. Here are the different types of conflict response. While they're listed as separate types, they really can overlap a bit in practice, but I'll just share a little bit about each. Back please. Restorative practices seek to understand and repair harm to an impacted party or community. They use education, motivational interviewing, reflections, and active dialogue. An example might be the use of a circle as a safe space where people can speak and listen to one another. And the questions being addressed would be, what happened? What were you thinking and feeling at the time? What have you thought about or felt since then? Who has been affected by what happened? What do you think needs to be done to make things right? Mediation is a process in which two individuals or groups meet to resolve a conflict with the facilitation and assistance of a neutral third party. Mediators assist both parties with airing concerns, clearing up misunderstandings, and arriving at a resolution that's mutually agreeable. An example might be a conflict between roommates that they're all interested on working to resolve. So the question might be, what can we all live with? Shuttle negotiation is a more indirect conversation. It's facilitated by a neutral third party between two or more parties that are involved in a conflict, but it doesn't include direct communication between the participants. The neutral third party would meet with each participant to hear their concerns and then work to create an agreement that addresses everyone's interests and needs. Alternative dispute resolution doesn't really apply for something that students would request from our office, but it's a process that may be utilized to resolve a formal conduct allegation. Conflict coaching is a one-on-one consultation designed to assess and develop an individual's communication skills and conflict management strategies. For example, a student may be faced with a difficult or new situation and could benefit from talking it through with someone and exploring their options of how best to respond to the situation. This is probably the most common way we engage with students because it can be a great way to get support, especially if the other party involved in the conflict is not interested in being involved in something like mediation. Because like I said before, the services are voluntary. So you may have one student really wanting to engage, but the other party is not interested. So conflict coaching can be really good for that. Facilitated dialogue is a conversation between individuals in which a facilitator helps parties overcome communication barriers and engage in productive conversation regarding an issue of mutual concern. So the goal is to create a safe environment for participants to consider other perspectives. Conflict response options can be requested by students, student organizations, faculty, or staff. A person who's experiencing the conflict can fill out our conflict response consultation form, and then they'll get contacted by a case manager who will schedule a time to talk with them to learn more about what their experience and concerns are and discuss their options. You can get to that form by using the QR code, and it's also, there's a link to the form on our website. Sometimes, go back. The other one, the drop-in services, is there because sometimes students may be hesitant to just complete a form and would rather talk with a person first. So we offer virtual drop-in services Monday through Friday from 1 to 4:30. And these are designed to provide general assistance about the conduct process, OSCR services, conflict response, university resources. So this QR code for drop-in services will take you to our website where you can find a drop-in request form and a link to the Zoom waiting room. Next two slides are just a reminder that students can report allegations of student misconduct to our office if they have concerns. And then if it's ever an emergency, do not fill out a form for our office, just contact 911. And that's all I've got. I'll pass it on.
And my screen's open now. Oh, I apologize. I'm Terry Vesho. I'm a professor of psychology and women's gender and sexuality studies. I'm going to talk about engagement in the classroom a little bit today. Can I go to the next slide? Thank you. And talk about socio-political stress and how it gets manifest in the classroom. In a lot of, just one at a time, let's first talk about what socio-political stress is and how it pops up. I would define socio-political stress are student-generated comments that were previously unacceptable or considered socially unacceptable, often racist, often feel or experienced as racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic by underrepresented group members. And this political climate has made it okay to ask questions and raise these comments in the classroom. And if you go down to the next slide, and underrepresented group members may experience these as derogating and prejudicial comments. So they have to be dealt with in a couple of different ways. They cause a lot of stress. It will help to think about how to deal with these in the classroom, both for the faculty members dealing with the comments, but also for students experiencing these. If you are members of underrepresented groups, we can think about it the same way, both from the standpoint of faculty who are trying to deal with these difficult situations as they arise, and as underrepresented group members. First of all, they come up primarily in classrooms that are discussion-based or provide a large opportunity for discussion and involvement. Interestingly, they can be in quite advanced classes in the senior capstones, but they can also be in lab-based classes. Up until maybe a year ago, I mean, they ebb and flow. Up until very recently, it's interesting, you would have them come up in unexpected context. So it might come up more often in a class where students are pursuing their own research ideas. Like I teach a research methods class that's lab-based, and students are all developing their own ideas, and there's a variability of the students that are in the room. It's not a class that's on the topic of stereotyping, prejudice, discrimination. It's actually on a broader topic. And as students develop their own ideas, you can see you'll have a lot of these comments come up as people are trying to figure out what they think and what is a pursuable research idea. And that can catch people off guard because faculty members are often not teaching. Faculty members teaching those classes often don't have the expertise of dealing with stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination. Another place in which it comes up that we should be aware of as faculty, so to deviate and step away from students for a minute, it comes up in assignments that students turn in, that students can complete and raise a bunch of points in assignments that can create these socio-political stress moments for our graduate teaching assistants, and we should be aware of those as well. Now, more recently, this semester, I'm teaching a prejudice, privilege, and social inequalities class, and almost every week, a socio-political stress moment is coming up. And I had just explained to some colleagues a few months ago that it very rarely comes up in this context because the students who select into taking these kinds of advanced classes often are more politically aligned. But in the current context, that's not true. There's been an array of questions about DEI hires and a whole bunch of misperceptions about what a DEI policy is, how they're implemented, who is hired based on them, and it creates a whole array of socio-political stress moments. So when you think about how to handle these, both from the perspective of a faculty member, but also when we think about encouraging students to speak or speaking up for ourselves, if you are a student in such a class, I would encourage you to know your goals a priori before it ever happens. If you can click forward one more, know your goals. We want to address, I would say that a couple of our goals are the same, that no matter what we want to address, challenge and interrogate inaccuracies, stereotypes, and prejudice. We want to do that as educators. We want to do that as people who create egalitarian environments. We want to do that as people who teach to all students in a classroom. We also want to engage and empower students to speak up for themselves in the next click. And this becomes pretty important in dealing with it and modeling. I myself, as a member of underrepresented groups, as a woman and LGBTQ community member, I also work hard, and my own personal goal in addition to these is to model how to deal with prejudice and discrimination for underrepresented group members who they themselves have to deal with the socio-political stress. So in these contexts, those are my goals going in. The goals can vary a little bit and individual people's goals may differ, but having these in mind before things happen really helps figure out the response. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. As we want to think about creating teachable moments, there's two things that are absolutely imperative, I think. Have no fear and do not try to persuade. I think that the gut reaction is to try to convince students how they're wrong and present facts. And then there's a lot of pressure. Now, in these contexts, if we go into a mode where we're trying to persuade and trying to argue or convince somebody, we're going to get into a situation where people dig in and we may not be as effective as we want. I would suggest that what we want to do is something quite different than that, and teach students how to think, how to have the academic model, how to engage and model, and model academic inquiry. So at any point when a student makes a comment that falls into this realm that I would attribute to being caused by socio-political stress, they're typically racist, sexist, anti-immigration, anti-trans, anti-LGBT. They pop up in these contexts. I would urge people to very strongly question the student and the clarity and the meaning of their comment. So, for example, I just had an incident happen last week in class where somebody raised their hand and said, "What about DEI hires?" And instead of answering the question and arguing and debating, I first asked the student bringing it up to explain what they mean by DEI hires and to elaborate. And as the person elaborates, then they went into a whole host of information that's incorrect about affirmative action, how it works, how it's implemented, who's hired, which allowed the opportunity to provide a whole bunch of examples and data for how the policies actually work. Here's what affirmative action actually is. Here's what EOE policies actually look like at a university. And here's the information. These are undergraduates. Here's the information you actually have when you're hiring. Here's the whole array of information. They're focused on a very few data points. And that provided an opportunity for students, and students dove in and started asking questions about what a DEI hire is, why they think their relatives weren't hired because women and people of color were hired. And this debate started back and forth where the students were having fun, talking to each other, debating with one another, pointing out flaws in logic, gaps in logic. And what's nice about this is when somebody's a target of discrimination, the most frequently experienced emotion that people have is anger, injustice often leads to anger. And anger is an emotion we want to help our students have and direct, because anger, if there's a subjective feeling of anger and a perception that there's something you can do to fix it, and that it's caused by an injustice, students will actually engage and act and model debate for one another. So what's nice here is I try to get students to get to a place where their job in the classroom is to stand up for themselves and to negotiate. We talk about models early on in the classroom before anything ever happens on day 1 or day 2, that if there's something not working for them, I would like them to be advocates for themselves. And that if there's a time frame of assignments that's too heavy, or if there's something they don't understand, that their job is to stand up and negotiate. One of the hardest things to learn how to do. Then I give them some models of how to negotiate and advocate for one another. And people negotiate better when doing so on behalf of others. So we've talked about all of these things early on in the semester. And then in this context, what ends up happening and what you can encourage is students standing up and talking on behalf of one another. And this will logically develop. So the student discussion, instead of defending oneself, instead of arguing what's racist from my standpoint as a person of color, what's sexist from my standpoint as a woman, whatever those are, you'll see students taking an ally model, standing up and verbally being active in the debate on behalf of one another. So you can develop an ally model and discussion and empower students within the classroom. It's important to address inaccuracies, absolutely address inaccuracies as they arise, both in the beginning statements and as people pop up, but have no fear about them coming up, because the students do a good job with you in a community of standing up to it. When I think about things that are problematic, shutting down discussion becomes problematic. It's hard to get it going again. Telling students what they believe becomes problematic, because then telling students what the facts are and how they're wrong, then you'll have a student dig in and argue all semester, or have a student drop and cut off the conversation. And I would like to encourage people to think about this both as students who are members of underrepresented groups, but also as faculty. These things are happening all over the country, all over campus. We want them to happen in the classroom, where we can stand together as allies and model what an academic discussion looks like and how we point out where there are gaps in logic. Thank you. I'll pass it on to activism and engagement beyond the classroom.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Jackson, and I am currently a fourth-year student here at Penn State University Park. I serve as the current vice president of Penn State Lion Caucus. I just want to say thank you to all the stakeholders involved with this webinar, and thank you to the listeners, as well as thank you for including Lion Caucus in this very important conversation. So, what is Lion Caucus? We are the student arm of the Penn State Office of Government and Community Relations, otherwise known as the OGCR. We are an advocacy organization that focuses on fair funding and the passage of state appropriations in the Pennsylvania State Legislature. The purpose of Lion Caucus and our Advocate Penn State mission is to promote the official message and positive influence of Penn State to local and state and federal leaders. Lion Caucus also educates fellow students about important legislation and policies that impact the university and students. We host Penn State Capitol Day on campus and in Harrisburg, where students have the chance to meet with members of the Penn State legislature and express their love for Penn State and why our university is worth funding and investing in. For context and a little bit of history, and you can stay on this slide, Lion Caucus was founded in 2018 due to a long period of flat funding and no budget increase for Penn State, as inflation and other costs have simultaneously risen. This graphic highlights some of those unfair funding statistics that Lion Caucus uses often in our conversations with elected leaders at all levels of the government. It's also a good example of some of the materials that this organization helps the OGCR with as a portion of our educational tools utilized on campus. You can go to the next slide. So what does advocacy mean to us? This is supporting, promoting, or arguing in favor of a cause or policy or rights or the rights of individual or groups. This looks like raising awareness or effects that change on behalf of a particular issue or population. And a good chunk of advocacy occurs on behalf of others and groups who may struggle to naturally find their voice, kind of building off some of the sentiments that Terry laid out in the previous presentation. You can switch. So how can you use advocacy like the work that we do in Lion Caucus to cope with active socio-political stressors that exist today in our daily discourse? And Lion Caucus believes, and I believe, that finding an issue and policy you care about, and then finding your voice on that topic, and then using that voice to amplify your concerns. This provides a sense of satisfaction and happiness in a space that seems to lack that. Some issues, like the one that Lion Caucus advocates for, don't necessarily see political lines. We come together for a common agreed upon cause of Penn State. So being able to find that cause or an issue that may not have a partisan identity, because I promise you that they do exist. And in Lion Caucus, we like to say that our political party is Penn State. So you can switch to the next slide. So how does Lion Caucus exercise our advocacy strategies? We send emails to legislators, which was also brought up earlier. We get members of the Penn State community to sign our Advocate Penn State petition, and this is direct emails to local legislators, just basically echoing the sentiments and the importance of Penn State. We work with other student organizations on campus that support our work, and then we also try to find ways how we can support them and work together. We write op-eds, and we also place a large emphasis on our members being able to craft a Penn State story that really resonates with legislators. You can switch. And then finally, the good news is that I believe student advocacy is alive and well at Penn State. You can find this through many student orgs like Lion Caucus, the UPUA, CCSG, and there are many other partisan political groups and nonpartisan political groups that do exist. In conclusion, I implore us all to find an issue you care about and amplify it to a larger crowd. And personally, as a senior, I've been engaged in circles like this since 2021, and I can confidently say, as someone who also experiences political stressors on the daily, these organizations keep me grounded and calm, and I'm forever grateful for those opportunities. And I just want to say with that includes my section of the webinar. Thank you again to everyone who hosted this event. I was very happy to be here.
I don't know if this is it, Steph. Or is Blake gonna do something else?
There he is. Yeah, we'll just have one final brief mindfulness invitation for those who are attending live. You're welcome to hop off if you need to be somewhere. But Blake, if you have a few minutes, we appreciate your final invitation.
Yeah, so honestly, just because I know we're over time a bit, but just taking a moment to take one more breather can really matter. Even a few deep breaths can be enough to activate the part of our nervous system that allows us into a state of rest and digest. So encourage everyone to find a moment, even this evening, or at some point, whenever you're listening to this, at some point today, to pause, take a breather, allow yourself to stay grounded. And that might be what helps you to move forward with a little more curiosity, intention, and to care for yourself in a compassionate way. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for attending today. For more information, you can visit the CAPS Sociopolitical Stress Management webpage here at the CAPS website. For more information, video, a life hack kit, and this recording as well will be on that website And we hope everybody has a lovely rest of the day. Thank you.